Hi, welcome back. We're doing section two, chapter five here. We're talking about the American colonies before the American Revolution in the 18th century. So we're going to be talking about the Great Awakening to pioneer presses. The Great Awakening, which was the first mass movement of the American people, something that all people here in the not the United States, but in the Americas enjoyed kind of together. It kind of proved that America could get together and do something as one, which is big because 40 years later, they're fighting as one against the British. So, before we get back to that, Puritanism, church going, was not as fiery and passionate as it was when the people first came to America in the 1600s. A couple things hurt it. The elaborate doctrines of the churches, they're hard for the commoners, for the lay people, as they would call, to understand. And then, the liberalization of membership requirements, allowing half breeds, as I called them, into the church, kind of just watered down some of the church fervor that was going on. And then also you got some bad preachers. They were called dead dogs. That they were boring. They sat there and droned on, and yeah, we're gonna learn about the Bible some more. And okay. Yeah. So that went on for hours. Remember, and you had to go to church because it was the law, and if you fell asleep, you could be shackled for that. So you get some movements that kind of go on in America in the 1700s that kind of, awaken the slumber of the United States. Not the United States. I'm sorry, I keep saying that. We're not the United States yet. Awaken America, and that's why it's called the Great Awakening. So you have the Arminianism, that's hard to say. Jacobus Arminius argued that free will determine a person's fate, that you can actually earn your way into heaven through good deeds, which is the opposite of Calvinism and predestination. So the Great Awakening, like I said, big religious movement in the 1730s and 1740s. Started in Northampton, Massachusetts by Jonathan Edwards, who is the guy who was very fiery. He was emotional. His Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God is very famous. It's widely read in American lit classes. It's the one where he describes how much God despises all of us and he's holding us over the pit of hell. I've mentioned it a few times before. The only thing that saves us is the grace of God. And that emotion, that energy kind of made people say, wow, I could listen to this guy, even though he's telling me how much I'm evil and wicked, but at least he's not going, oh, there we go, let's read the Bible again. But he also reaffirmed that faith in God, not good works, brought salvation, that having faith and predestination and all that. So you had to believe in God. It wasn't just doing good things, which is kind of a direct counter to the Catholics. He was very energetic, very passionate, but he's not the one. I mean, he starts the Great Awakening, but the guy that is credited with the Great Awakening is George Whitefield. He's an former English actor who toured the colonies in 1734, and he just set our country ablaze with passion and excitement. He also spawned a wave of imitators, as any great orator or actor or speaker does. He was enthusiastic. He was a powerful preacher. Um, one He was called one of England's just great orators. One of England's greatest actors. I'm going to read this from the book here. Of the day, commented enviously that Whitehood could make audiences weep merely by pronouncing the word Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia. Oh my gosh! And then they would start crying. And he would give 100 guineas or coins if I could only say "oh" like Mr. Whitefield. So apparently he was a very, very just amazing speaker, Mr. Whitefield. So I mean, he was very powerful, but these these sermons that were going on, people were passionate, and there was a lot of hooting and hollering, and people were having fun at church, hearing the word and that, and so a lot of the old school, the Orthodox is Greek for the right way or the correct way, clergymen were skeptical about this, emotional preaching. They're called the Old Lights, and actually, the Great Awakening leads to the split of the Presbyterian Church, the Congregational Church. It leads to a lot of people leaving and going to more energetic churches like the Baptist. And then you have the New Lights, who defended the awakening for its role in revitalizing American religion, which also spread to blacks too, African slaves. Uh, I was going to read here that there was sorry. So I mean, Ben Franklin was skeptical of this, and he saw Edwards, and he actually donated his whole pocketbook, which he was kind of a stingy guy. Jonathan Edwards was moved to tears of how powerful of a speaker he was. The big point, religion was revitalized, and it's the first spontaneous mass movement, as I led into with this. Um, I don't know if you've ever been to a holy roller church where people are speaking in tongues, a Southern Baptist or a Pentecostal church. Very energetic, very moving, people dancing and bowing down and praise the Lord Jesus and things like that. And this is kind of where it started. And people that were old fashioned or old school didn't necessarily like it. But these revivals were held out in the fields, and there were stories of people rolling around in the snow and healings and all that. One preacher was had his shirt off, and he was preaching and sweating and dancing and all doing all that stuff, which for very conservative people, not the way you're supposed to preach. And so, like I said, it led to a splitting of many of the churches here in America. In schools and colleges, we're looking at kind of the cultural aspects of America. Some of our institutions. We're talking about church. In Puritan New England, the reason why you do education is because you need to read the Bible. Because of the way the towns were formed, they're close knit. They were more interested in education than any other section. They have the first public schools. Very important that they do that. Church members were needed to be able to read the Bible. That was critical for them. It's not just listening to someone who's read the Bible. You need to read it yourself. You need to have a relationship with the good book, with the Word, as many call it today. Public schools were big in New England. Schools were less frequent the further south one went. As you went further and further south, not as many public education opportunities. We're talking, primary and secondary schools, mainly because they're getting more and more spread out. It's not that they didn't value education as much. Many of the Southern people that were, the elite Southerners hired tutors and did private schooling. But, schools like we think of, modern schools, don't really exist. In New England, we're getting some early versions of it. College education was very important in New England, mainly for going into being a clergy, which, remember, was held in high esteem to be a member of the clergy. The training for the ministry was very important. There were 9 local colleges that were established during the colonial era. They taught the dead languages, Greek and Latin, and theology, and not a lot of the modern stuff as you would think today. I'm trying to find the list of the 9 colleges there. Harvard, William and Mary, Yale, Princeton, Penn, Pennsylvania, which is Ben Franklin's college, Columbia, Brown, Rutgers, and Dartmouth. Princeton used to be called the College of New Jersey. Pennsylvania was the Academy. Columbia was King's College. Brown was Rhode Island's college. And Rutgers was Queen's College. Some of them are royal institutions. Coleridge, we have Jenny Call. She's at Brown right now, which is pretty cool. Our first Ivy Leaguer. There's a very prestigious schools I just listed. Ben Franklin started the University of Pennsylvania, fighting Quakers. And it was the first college in America free from denominational control. It wasn't a denomination, it wasn't a Presbyterian, it wasn't a Congregationalist school. So that was the University of Pennsylvania, still a great school today. Now, there's what I was looking for. I was reading out the book. So you can see there's the denomination of our colleges. Harvard being the first. Harvard. William and Mary, Yale, Princeton, Penn, Columbia, Brown, Rutgers, and Dartmouth, which began as an Indian missionary school in New Hampshire. So our culture, the provincial culture, artists had to travel to Europe for training. You couldn't get formal training to be an artist in America unless your art is building log cabins or making moonshine. John Trumbull, Charles Wilson Peale, Benjamin West, John Singleton Copley, some of the famous portrait artists in American history who did many of the portraits you're going to see in the coming chapters, had to go get trained in England and France and places like that because there just weren't people here to do it. In terms of agriculture, architecture, the red brick Georgian style, named after King George and his reign in the Hanovers, was introduced in the 1720s. Colonial literature, nothing special. I mean, that's why in American Lit class you're starting out with Jonathan Edwards, and then you kind of just skip ahead to usually, some political papers, Federalist Papers, Declaration of Independence, Constitution, Bill of Rights. Then you jump to like Edgar Allan Poe. Scientific progress in the colonies lag behind progress in Britain. Not a lot of stuff going on in science except for Mr. Benjamin Franklin with his experiments with electricity, his experiments, inventing things. He was probably the most well-known American in the world by the time of the Revolution. He was a famous scientist and inventor. People knew who Ben Franklin was all throughout Europe. Ben Franklin was considered the only first-rank scientist in the New World, and he penned Poor Richard's Almanac, which was read widely here in America. Very popular. He edited it himself from 1732 to 1758. He proved lightning had electricity. He invented bifocals. He invented the Franklin stove, the lightning rod, musical instruments, a lot of different things. He's a he's a crazy character. He was a little wild too. We'll talk about a little bit of the wild side later. Here's a picture of the Georgian style there. A lot of the colleges in the East have that style for a lot of their buildings. Don't have that out here in the West. This is some colonial craftsmanship. It's called the Pennsylvania Dutch. It's store stuff. It's pretty nice though. I'm not even sure what's going on there. Oh, Magnetic Dispensary. It's a painting of the era of basically they're preoccupied with electricity, so they're showing how to do that. It's kind of similar to what they did with this Mesmer, Franz Mesmer of France, doing hypnotism. That's a different lesson, though. Pioneer Press is about 40 colonial papers were around in 1775. They proved vital to the American Revolution. Key component to that, printing presses cranked out pamphlets, leaflets, journals. They were easy to print. You could do it quickly, cheaply. Not a lot of books here. Books were very expensive. They were rare. From 1734 to 1735, John Peter Zenger was charged with libel for his anti-governor publishings. His trial was critical in the hearing because the Zenger trial acquitted him and established the idea of freedom of press. You're allowed to produce or publish whatever you want in terms of news, as long as it's based on fact, which I'm not even sure some of our newspapers do that. But that's one of our key components of the First Amendment of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, is freedom of press, and that comes from the Zenger trial, which was in New York. So that's all we have for today. A little short one. We'll finish up the chapter here later. Have any comments or questions? Let me know.